Welcome to Redefining Real Estate. I'm Rylan.
And I'm Morgan. Expect a mix of education, humor, and authentic conversation as we explore all things real estate.
Let's jump into today's episode.
So, today we're going to be talking about the expectations during home inspections.
Yes.
So, in your experience, Rylan, what have inspections looked like for your buyers?
So most of our inspections have been pretty good so far. I haven't had anything like too crazy quite yet. The inspection process, like in itself, has been a little chaotic on the actual inspection day. But you know, typically once you go under contract, you're going to schedule those as soon as you can. That way, you're still within your option period, and you have time to really evaluate the home and make sure that you're comfortable moving forwards. Yeah, so typically we're looking at around like an hour to 2 hours, you know.
And what inspectors do you typically recommend?
I would typically recommend general HVAC and then like the WDI.
The pest inspector.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the three ones that I typically recommend the most. If, you know, certain circumstances are different, then obviously we'll kind of go from there. But the first time I ever went to my inspections, I was all excited, you know, because it was a newer home, so I wasn't, you know, too worried. We had a pre-list already done, so my buyers got to review that before we even like went and looked at the home.
Yeah.
So we already kind of knew what we were walking into, but I was pretty excited, and I did not know how chaotic it gets. I think there was like 4 different dudes just, you know, going back and forth in and out.
Yeah, running around like crazy.
Yeah, all the sinks were on, the oven was going. I was just like kind of, you know, yeah, this is normal. Like,
right.
You know, we're good. But yeah, everything came back good, and it was a good experience. It matched the pre-list inspection like
exactly
perfectly. Yeah. So yeah, that was it's kind of been my experience with, you know, my first one, and then, you know, moving forward. So we've had a couple different findings. But what about you? How's it been?
Yeah, pretty similar. I mean, I've had inspections that bring up a lot more major issues, of course,
Right.
Just over the last couple of years. But because of the market, it hasn't been anything that buyers were willing to really consider as a deal breaker until more recently, where there's a lot more options for buyers, which is good. You should have more negotiating power in our market. But yeah, it is a little chaotic when you first get there. Like you mentioned, there's guys running around. They turn the heater on. It's hot in there, and then it's freezing cold because they're testing the HVAC.
Yeah.
So it is chaotic, and usually what I tell my clients is, you know, they're going to do their thing. The inspectors are going to write up their report, take all their pictures, and then at the end, usually within 30 minutes, one of them will get completed. They'll come talk to us. We'll make note. And I think what's really important is how the inspectors communicate at the end of their kind of session there.
I agree.
Because the report is going to have a lot of information in it, but they can't prioritize things in the report.
Right.
So that's why the communication is so important.
Yeah, I agree.
And so in your experience, I mean, what types of inspectors do you prefer to use? Or like, I know obviously our team has preferences, but what are some things that you look for whenever you're doing that selection process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one you already kind of have mentioned is the communication on whatever they find, you know, because like you said, they give you a huge report with a lot of pictures and a lot going on, and it looks super scary off the jump. But someone that really can just give you like the highlights and like what you actually need to address and what you need to be like aware of, that's probably the biggest thing I would say. And also too, just being able to stick to their schedule, be on time, you know, be efficient with what they're doing. Those are probably the biggest things that I'm looking for. And I mean, so far the team has been able to build relationships with people in the community that we can call people, and you know, we'll have it done effectively. So that's definitely been good so far.
Yeah, I know in my experience, sometimes it gets kind of nerve-wracking when you're going under contract, especially on a weekend and your option period starts.
Yep.
And you want to go ahead and get inspections scheduled ASAP to make sure that obviously you want to have them like as soon as possible after you go under contract, like you mentioned earlier. Right. But having the relationship with some of these inspection companies in town has been helpful for that reason, because even if they say they're booked online, we can reach out separately and try to fit our clients in. And I know that maybe many of our clients don't even know that's going on. We're just telling them, you know, this day, this time, they're available. But on the back end, we're doing a lot of work trying to get them in as quickly as possible.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So, and with that being said, I mean, what what cost are we looking at here? What can people expect whenever they are getting these scheduled?
Yeah, so I've had some clients in the past not really want to do inspections because they were thinking it's like a new construction home, so they wouldn't really need to do it because it's brand new. It should already be fine. My whole kind of approach to that conversation is really more geared towards like, well, if you don't want to spend a couple $100 right now, imagine what would happen if after you close a month later, you look up when you're about to go to sleep or something, and there's just like a huge crack in the ceiling, something that you may have missed, I may have missed when we're walking it. And then next thing you know, like you may have some foundation issues or water damage that could have been found. And then now you're responsible for replacing that all on your own out of pocket. So that was kind of, the framing on that. And, it's really like the upfront cost compared to like what you could be paying is always, going to be kind of what I'm talking about. But typically with general, I mean, it's anywhere from like what, 300 to 500.
Right. Depending on the square footage of the home.
Yeah. And also, which inspector you're using, I'm sure they all price things differently. And then for HVAC around, I think 150 would be fair. And then same thing with the pest as well. So.
Yeah, and even though it sounds like a lot, obviously upfront, especially after you pay your earnest money deposit and your option fee, but keep in mind that most of these you can pay at closing, meaning they just like roll in with your closing costs. I think the only one is WDI, at least for our inspectors that have mentioned they're no longer going to be allowing that, but at least in our market, it's pretty common for the inspectors to be fine with you paying out their invoices at closing, unless you want to pay them sooner, which of course is always an option.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with you. I mean, especially with new construction, people are always like, well, I don't want to pay this extra money. The builders should have their own crew coming through here. And like, yes, they do have like standards that they have to meet, but also they're looking out for themselves. Yeah. They're not looking out for you as the buyer. Exactly, so it's always nice to have someone on your side, like an additional team of people on your side who are extremely detail oriented and who can go through that.
For sure.
And then obviously with new construction, you have that like warranty, workmanship warranty. Yes. So it's nice to have all of that documentation too when you go to the end of that and you want to get more repairs completed by the builder for free.
No, for sure. I definitely agree with you. As far as the like inspection report goes, what's been something that like you've noticed that's been super like beneficial with it?
Well, like we've talked about before, there's going to be a lot of details on these reports. And the general is really overwhelming for most people who don't do this every day.
For sure.
So it's probably between 15 and 30 pages of pictures and documentation showing what's going on with the house, especially if it's an older home. And by older home, I mean like older than 10 to 20 years.
Right.
Because most of the report is going to be things that are not in code anymore. So this doesn't mean that they have to be fixed. This just means when the home was built, code was different than what it is now. So they have to notate these items. And it's not a safety issue. It's not a health issue. It's simply something that you need to be aware of, just educational wise.
Right.
So that's why, like we talked about earlier, the communication at inspections is so important because they can relay information to you as far as priorities go. Versus when you're looking at the report, it's 30 pages of just this was deficient, this was deficient, this was deficient. Because maybe, for example, maybe the electrical plugs are further than 6 feet apart.
Yes.
And if you were to get a new home today, that's what the standard would be.
Yep.
So that's really what we're going to be looking for. Obviously, the reports also allow us to utilize them for negotiation purposes. The HVAC report typically has a quote on it for any work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
So we can use those quotes to negotiate in repair costs or, again, educate you on what things you may want to address after the fact. But I know many, many buyers who get the inspection report, we negotiate in repair costs, and then they probably do maybe a fourth of like what was on there. Because you have to remember, like if someone is living there and it's not in terrible condition, like the home is livable.
Yeah.
It's not a pass or fail situation. It's more of like, okay, if everything on this report was completed, this would be a new home. because I mean, we're talking about code issues as well.
Yeah.
And that's not our expectation when we're looking at a resale home.
Right. I think that's honestly a really good perspective to have. It's not necessarily like a pass or fail situation. I think a lot of clients go into the inspections thinking like if we find anything, like we're done for, or like we're buying something, like they're scamming something. But yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. And I try to have that perspective because it can be so overwhelming and emotional. Obviously, you and I do this every day, but when you're buying a home, this is one of the biggest purchases in your life. And so, yes, when you go to an inspection, and even though the house may be 40, 50 years old, you're going to be feeling a little bit disappointed when it's not what it seemed like on the surface. But it's only because you're finding out all these little details. It's not that the house isn't livable. It's simply that they have to include all these things for you to understand what you may want to address further down the line.
Right. Yeah. I think the emotions are always going to be there,
yes.
Especially during inspections. We were doing some inspections on not a new construction, but it was like 2022. So like it had been lived in, but it was still pretty much brand new. And there was a little bit of cracking in the flooring. And during the inspections, the general was there going around, HVAC was there, and my client found him in a room pouring some water on the ground to see if the cracks were like bubbling, and he was just kind of very like uneasy about all that. But through the inspections, the general was able to confirm they were just like surface level stuff in the flooring. It wasn't anything like to be concerned about.
Yes.
So it was nice because I probably could not have given him that like guarantee that everything's okay. But we were able to address that situation and everything was, kind of fine after that.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand, like, while we are the professionals with negotiating and guiding you through this process, we are not professional inspectors.
Right.
We can tell you our experience, but a home inspector has seen homes. They're probably doing at least 5 inspections a day for who knows how many years at this point.
Right.
So they can tell you what's normal. And especially in Bryan-College Station, some of the things that we need to think about are going to be the settling of foundations in this area because of the soil. It's super common to see settling cracks. There are certain things that are going to be larger red flags than others, but overall it's more about, again, what you're comfortable with as long as the foundation is as long as the house is performing as it should.
Yeah.
But as far as buyer emotions go, what I tell my clients up front is like that first week, because typically our option periods are 7 days. So that first week is going to be super overwhelming. We're going to be talking a lot of emotions going back and forth, figuring out where your deal breakers are. And then after that first week, usually it's almost like crickets. Like you and I, of course, are following up with our clients, but at the same time, it's nowhere near the amount of stress that they endured during that first week or so during the option period where we're trying to negotiate. Now it's just about, okay, let's make sure all the repairs get done. If there are any, you stay with your lender and keep in close contact with them about any documentation they need. But beyond that first week, it's pretty lax.
Right. Yeah, I think during my first deal, I after that first week kind of passed, I didn't really know where I was. I was like, okay, now what? What's the next fire that I got to put out?
Yes.
But through trial and error, I learned that that's just kind of the slower part of the transaction process as far as our end goes.
Right. And with your experience with inspections, how has that gone? Like, what comes out of inspections typically with your clients? I know you mentioned you've helped them with some newer homes versus older, but I'm curious what your experience has been.
Yeah, so the inspections went good on, the homes that I have, done inspections on. They all went very smoothly, nothing too crazy, like, other than cleaning the HVAC system, like the filters, simple stuff like that. The only, I would say, concern that I've experienced was a very small nail in the roof. It was a roofing nail that like was only just barely within the shingles. It wasn't actually like through and through. I definitely would not have seen that. My client would not have seen that. It wouldn't have been something that we probably would have known about for a very long time until, it was a water leak or something like that. So the general inspector found it. He was able to do a moisture reading through the roof to make sure that it wasn't leaking at all. Thankfully, it wasn't. So that was very good. Obviously, he recommended that we remove it and patch it up, seal it nicely. But that was probably one of like, sounds very minor, you know, obviously like a nail in the roof, but it's not like the foundation's ruined. But, you know, it was something so small, but could have caused so much roof damage for my client in the future. Again, like we would not have seen that, you know, like it was something like that. Like that's where I just feel like the value is with inspections, is like they're gonna catch something as small as a little bitty nail in the roof. So that was probably like a big kind of takeaway for me on one of those.
Yeah, I know I've worked with a lot of buyers on much, much older homes.
Yes.
And those can be a lot more of a beast to tackle because, again, like most of the stuff is going to be code. And a lot of times if people have been living in it, seller's perspective is, well, I've been living here. It's been working how it should as I'm here. You know, they don't care about what happens after closing day.
Yeah.
Whereas that's the buyer's main concern.
Right.
So I know recently I've had a couple that have not gone as well. But we have to remember, it's all about what our clients are comfortable with. Yeah. If your client is not going to be comfortable with the fact that the foundation is moving or that they're settling in this area, like you just have to roll with the punches and go with a different type of property. Yeah. I've noticed that a lot of clients have that concern, especially when they're moving here from other areas like up north.
Yes.
Because they're not used to the movement that we see here. But again, it's like on an older home, if it's 50 years old, most of the damage that could have happened from foundation movement or settling has usually already been done. At least that's what the general inspectors have mentioned to me in the past. Yeah. So that is something that at least you can see when you go into it. Yeah. Like, okay, it is presenting as it should be, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, another one that I had, which I think it is important to talk about what your deal looks like in the context of other comps in the area. Okay, yeah. Because I had a client recently who we went and looked at a house. It seemed, obviously, people were living there. Yeah. So everything seemed good to go. This was in, one of the nicer neighborhoods here in College Station. And we knew that it most likely was going to need a new HVAC system. Okay. Or at least that was probably going to be our biggest concern from what we saw when we went and viewed it, because the HVAC looked all original. You know, it was like 20 years old. Okay. So we went and did inspections, and that was pretty much what came back from inspections. That was everyone's point of view. But then after we looked at the reports, again, this part can be very overwhelming where you communicate with the inspectors at the home. They're saying, hey, X, Y, and Z are the biggest priorities. This is what I would focus on. But then you get the reports and it's 100 things on the list. Yeah. Yeah. So we have to remind our clients, like, hey, remember, this is our priority. Let's see what we can do to get these things addressed. And we were still struggling to identify what are our deal breakers? What are we going to walk away if the seller doesn't do? Yeah. And I know for my clients specifically, what helped them is I pulled up some data to look at, okay, what other houses in this neighborhood have sold for within the last 6 months, and what seller concessions have the buyers gotten for those homes. And that really helped kind of create this big picture for my clients to see, okay, well, if we don't get this many concessions, it's not like we're not getting the value of the home, right? Because in comparison to what others have gotten, we're still getting, a home cheaper than what others have gotten for this exact type of property, and we're getting more seller concessions. Yeah. And so sometimes bringing the data into things can help people identify where their deal breakers are, especially for first-time home buyers. Yes. Again, it can be hard to know, what am I doing? Like, I don't know what my deal breakers are. Right. Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. That's something that kind of is, I feel like, a little outside of the box as far as seeing what other people were getting within the neighborhood. Yeah. Because, I mean, that data was probably very beneficial for your clients, and you know them, you know how they think and how they operate. So you know that was going to be the move for them. And they were able to hopefully make an educated decision moving forward. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's good. That's great. Well, I think moving forward, if any of our listeners has any questions about inspections or the real estate market here in Bryan-College Station, we would love to hear more from you guys, or even what your experiences have been during home inspections. And we'd love to talk about those on a future episode. If you missed any of our previous episodes, we did touch a little bit on home inspections last week. We talked about the top 5 myths in real estate. And so if that sounds like something you're interested in, please feel free to go back and take a listen. And feel free to find us on social media for any other questions you want to submit to us.
All right. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We hope you found something useful or at least had a good time listening.
Yeah. If you enjoy this episode, feel free to subscribe or share it with someone who might enjoy this content.
And if you have any questions or topics you want us to cover, reach out to us on Instagram. Everything will be linked below for you.